All right, thanks for having me again. If you don't know, this was part of my childhood living in Thousand Oaks. My dad was pastor here in the 80s, and so I'm going to make fun of my mother a couple times, and some of you will know it. That's all right, right? And since we're all friends here, and she's watching, it's okay. It's allowed. I'm allowed to do that. All right. Let's start with a story from the Bible, Lot. Lot, you remember Lot and his daughters and his wife. They end up in Sodom, right? And things go very poorly for Sodom, right? And Abraham is presented with this plan from God that he's going to destroy Sodom. And Abraham pleads with God. He's trying to save Lot. What if there's only 50 people there that are righteous, right? And he bargains with God, and finally he says, okay, there's only Lot and his family. And so God does send angels to warn Lot and get him out of Dodge, so to speak. And you know this story. But what always bothered me, and I'm willing to bet bothered you, is that Lot's wife turns back, right? And not just like she's looking at the disaster. She turns back in longing for Sodom, the place where all of that bad stuff happened, right? And if you know the story, right, Lot wants to send his daughters to the crowd to be, it's bad to start this day off with this word, but to be gang raped. Why does she turn back in yearning for that? Wouldn't she want to get out? Wait, why didn't they leave earlier? I think because she loved it. She loved it, right? Her heart was there. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about formation, is the heart. What do you love, right? How is your heart formed to love things, right? And so we're gonna talk about that idea of being formed or malformed. Lot's wife was malformed to love the wrong thing. Isn't that something different than what we hear in our society today, which is, well, you love whatever you want. That's fine. It's a very emotive. It's very like whatever you feel, whatever you like, whatever you personally love, then that is correct. Go find your own way. But we can be malformed to love things in a wrong way. And so just start thinking through the Bible. Doesn't that happen when something new comes your way and you reread the Bible and you're thinking in the back of your mind this one concept and you're like, oh, I never thought about that story in that way. I wonder if you start seeing the word formation in all of its different forms. We'll get to that in a little bit. And the word heart, you start thinking about that differently. Just the fact that we're formed in our world, when we say heart, we sort of think feeling, right? But it's something so much more than that. My heart is something so much more than that. Love is so much more than a feeling. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's give a definition of formation. I'm making this up. Here's one that is Christian. God forming us through his alien work of law and suffering, and ultimately through his proper work of the gospel, making us his righteous saints who love our neighbors and to love his gifts for us. So think of the word form as he's forming us to be something. He's forming our heart to be something. What does that formation look like? What's the goal? All that kind of stuff. Is it to form us to be Christ-like? I think yeah, in a way, yeah. Is he forming us to battle sin, right? To have this battle, this spiritual battle between me the sinner and me the saint? I think that's a part of it. Is formation, right, how I'm forming my life and my loves, is this discipline? I think so. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I think in a broader way, it's to get us to ask the question, how do I relate to God and to the world and the great big questions of life? Like, who am I and why am I here and how shall I act towards my neighbor? All of those kinds of things. All right. Let me use an analogy to get what I'm after here when it comes to formation. Think of your palate, right? Your tongue. Your palate is your appreciation of the taste, the texture, the smells, maybe even the presentation of food, right? All right. Now this is where we're going to make fun of my dear mother. Some of you know her. She's a pretty amazing woman. She had 6 kids, and we were not good. We were not. And, on a pastor's salary in the 1980s was not, not super great. And yet she was the PTA president for the local school there. And Pastor Bader reminded me that the little park over there, she was on the committee to make sure that used just to be like nothing but desert, right? And helped that park. She was an amazing woman. I saw the whole United States. She ingrained travel in me, all of these kinds of things. But I think it's safe to say she wasn't a great cook. Sorry, Mom, but she wasn't a great cook. My palate was formed in a certain way, right? Think about like when you had children and you introduce new textures to them and you taste whatever and they'd spit it out, that kind of stuff. But you knew that you had to form their palate, right? And so my palate is formed in a certain way. And when I got married, and I married into a family that was Midwestern, unless you had steak and potatoes, it wasn't really a meal, right? There's the old saying that if you don't have meat at a meal in the Midwest, you don't have to pray. It doesn't really count, right? Yeah, you don't have to pray unless there's meat there. And so I'm going to her family, and I'm like, I think these potatoes are not made well because they got lumps in them. It's supposed to be soupy, right? Because we had it out of a box, right? And the breakfast sausages were those little brown and serve whatever, this is authentic farm fresh. It was weird to me. My palate was formed in such a way that I couldn't appreciate authentic and good things. Isn't that something to think about, right? And if your palate was formed in fine dining, other things the cheaper food is gonna taste weird, right? If you go to a foreign country, some of those textures and those tastes, they're weird, right? They're weird. And I don't know if my palate will ever be sophisticated. Maybe some of that's genetics, it's just on me. But I wonder if you get to a point where you can't really change it too much, right? I have a taste for bad processed food. Like my wife, you met her, she's like 100 pounds dripping wet, but what you don't know is she's a fast food junkie. And so she'll call me up and she'll say, I'm stopping at Arby's on the way home, do you want something? And I go, I'm trying not to be fat. Well, Amanda, I'm trying to eat better. Yeah, I'm trying to be better. I'll have 2 roast beefs and cheddars. Make sure there's curly fries too, right? I don't know that I'll ever be able to break those habits, right? And I think this is true also of all things. The media that I consume, the music that I consume, my habits when it comes to my disciplines when they're spiritual, like devotions and stuff like that. It's not destiny, it's not unbreakable, right? But it's there. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and by the way, we may or may not follow this. We'll just see what happens. But here's one of the things that I admired about my parents and my mother. We're not a musical family. In particular, I'm very bad. One more story from my childhood. I remember standing right there, Christmas Eve practice, singing my little heart out because I love Jesus. And we went home after that practice, and she said, Mike, we're not going to sing so loud, okay, Mike? I have no musical talent. The family's not musical, whatever. But I still, on my phone today, listen to KUSC. We always had classical music on. It was the first preset in the car. I was exposed to something that was outside of my raw talent and abilities and interests. And still don't know anything about music. Like I couldn't tell you like what instruments or any of the Italian words or whatever, but it's still a part of my life. That would have never happened unless I was formed to love this. You start to see this as kind of coming together. How do you form your children and yourself to love things? To love really what is good, beautiful, and true. That's what we're after here. All right, one more example in the page 1 there. This is not one of my finer moments, but it was funny as a parent. Our little one came home from school, and I said, "What's your homework?" She's like, "Well, I got to do some reading or whatever." And I said, "Go do the reading." She said, "I don't want to do the reading." And I said, "Go do the reading." And she said, "But I really don't want to do the reading." I said, "But you have to go do the reading." And she said, "I don't want to." And I said, "Why not?" And she says, "It's boring." And I said, "It's not boring, you're boring." And it wasn't my most favorite moment, my proudest moment, but it was brilliant. Think about it. Think about it. Why was that assigned to you, dear? To make you not boring, to make you well-rounded, to form you to think about something in a different way, to expose you to different things. Literally, the teachers are trying to make you not boring. The reading's not boring, you're boring. It didn't work at all, but there was something there, right? And the problem with reading for children, right, and for adults is reading stamina, isn't that? I mean, I don't think anybody goes, "I hate reading because I hate information," or "I hate the delight of, words," or whatever. I don't think that's, it's I hate reading because it's like hating working out. Because you have to break through. You got to keep doing it. It's a stamina thing, right? It's a stamina thing. So how do you build up that stamina? Well, go read 10 pages, and then tomorrow read 12 pages, and the next day read 15 pages, right? You're forming your brain. You're forming the contact, the synapse contacts, or whatever. You're forming yourself to do something that's going to be better for you, right? Okay, that's all good stuff, right? There's some Bible passages here on page 1. We're not going to go through them. But sort of, I'll leave these Bible passages for you to look at, where you start to see me, especially St. Paul, talk about kind of formation and the heart and stuff like this. But on page 2, here's probably the most famous passage from Augustine, or Augustine, however you want to pronounce his name. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. And I think what he's really after in his writings, and if you don't know who he is, he's the North African bishop from Hippo in the 4th century. And the great theologians go like this: Adam, Abraham, Moses, Isaiah, Jesus, Paul, Augustine, Aquinas, Luther, and I don't know, we need another one coming here, right? Augustine or Augustine, he's the guy. And I think one of the most profound things that he did and drew the attention of Christians ever since is this idea of the heart, right? And our heart was made for something, to love God, to love others, to love what is good and true and beautiful, and we're restless until we find rest in Him. And so there's a good idea here where we say, you are what you love, right? You've heard you are what you eat. Maybe we could say you are what you think, you are what you feel, but he would say you are what you love, right? And so we're going to get to this a little bit about, like, who are you? Like, this is an honest question. Who are you, and how would you answer that question? Augustine would say, what do you love? That's who you are. What do you love? Now, this is not such an easy question to answer, and we'll get to it in a little bit. How do you determine what you actually love? What do you actually love? And I think the way you get there, as we'll see in a little bit, is follow your checkbook, follow your calendar, also follow your traditions, follow your symbols, and you'll find what you really love. So we already used the example of classical music, this idea of I can love something if I'm exposed to it and I'm formed to love it. It's not always that way. It's not always that way. But that's how you start to form yourself. You get exposed to things and you work at things, that kind of stuff. All right. Now, eventually we're going to move to this idea of like, what can I do in my day-to-day life, right? How am I going to do this? And this is, I think, what Pastor Bader was talking about. This is sort of timely for the Lutheran Church, and you wonder why don't we use the word formation like the evangelicals do, like the Roman Catholics did when they're very good at talking about theological formation. And I think rightfully so, we're like, if there's a to-do list for Lutherans, this is not good, right? Because then I got to check these things off, and then it's not really about grace anymore. And I think that's a good instinct. And so we are going to warn ourselves over and over again that more law is either going to lead to delusional arrogance. I read through the Bible in the whole year, right? I even made it through Leviticus. Good for you, right? This is kind of a delusional arrogance, right? And by the way, when you look through the stories of the New Testament and Jesus is talking to people, and especially the Pharisees, and they're like, we kept the whole law, you just stop and go, yeah, but that law wasn't actually that hard, was it? Like, they're like, we follow the Sabbath day. And you're like, oh, so you didn't work? Oh, I'm sure God is very pleased with you. You did a lot for him today by not working, right? It's kind of ridiculous. It's a delusional arrogance. Or if you're cursed with honesty, it's a desperate despair, because how could you ever keep a law perfectly? Any law, let alone God's perfect law. We also want to be careful not to fall into dead ritual, like, I make the sign of the cross, or I go to church, or I fast in Lent, and I just go through the motions. That's not helpful either, right? Okay. Before we get any further, though, let's talk about who we are in our spiritual anthropology. Let's use that as a word, spiritual anthropology. Anthropology, if I use that word today, it's the study of like human culture and what people ate back in, 10,000 years ago somewhere or whatever. What I mean here is, what's a human being? What is a human being? Specifically, what is a Christian? What is a Christian? I will read this from Romans chapter 6. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law but under grace? By no means. Don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one you obey, whether you are slaves to sin, which leads to death, or to obedience, which leads to righteousness. But thanks be to God that though you used to be slaves to sin, you have come to obey from your heart the pattern of teaching that has now claimed your allegiance. You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness. My favorite chapter these days in the Bible is Romans chapter 6. Starts off with baptism, right? That's why I really, really like it. But it's really important to understand what Paul is arguing here, and this is why it's become one of my favorite chapters, is because he really lays it out on who you are as a human being, and if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand anything. Let me simplify it for you. You're a sinner saint. You're 100% sinner, and you're 100% saint all at the same time, and I understand the math doesn't work out, but it sure explains your life, doesn't it? That one moment you can be a delight, and the next moment, not so much. You're not 50-50. You're not 60-40. You're 100% both. And this is actually, even though it sounds devastating, and it is in a way, is actually quite freeing, because I'm not on my way to being a saint. I already am. complete, done. Yeah? But I'm also a sinner. And I have this battle, right, in myself until one day the battle is over in heaven. So let's talk this through. All right. St. Paul uses the slave analogy, slave-master analogy here. And what he's saying is if you're a slave, you could almost think employee, right? It's not quite modern slavery. So just think about going to your job. You don't really have a free will. Like, you don't get to go there and go, I'm going to do what I want today. No, you have a boss, and your boss tells you what to do. And you have to do what your boss tells you to do. You have a master. The sinner has a master. The sinner always sins. He does not have a choice. He is always going to sin. Even if it looks kind of righteous, it's always sin. But here's the kicker. The saint also has a master. The saint also has a boss. And the saint cannot do anything but saint. A saint always saints. That's just who she is. That's who he is. There's no half and half. A saint always saints. A sinner always sins. And so I got this battle going on. And this is a Pauline distinction that's very important. So when we think about theological formation and malformation and ask the question, am I being formed by the sinful world and my sinful desire? I need to fight against that. You shouldn't think like, oh, I'm in danger of not being saved. Oh, I'm in danger of this, right? I'm 50-50. No, you're already good with God. Whether you make it through Leviticus or not. Right? Like, that's how love works. That's just how love works. But the reality of your life here is sinner saint. Right? And so there's a battle, and so therefore there should be discipline and the acknowledgement that we're being formed in bad ways, but also in good ways, right? But it's all in the freedom and the comfort of knowing it's going to be okay in the end. And there you can actually go and fight, right? Because in a lot of ways, you got nothing to lose, right? Because you're already good with Christ. It also helps us understand how you do this battle. So I'm not like 50-50, like today, because, I lost that spiritual weight and now I'm under, 185. I've made it. And then, now I'm bad, right? Or whatever. The way you do this battle is a death and resurrection model. The sinner's got to die. You can't reform the sinner. If you reform the sinner, you just got to reform sinner. He's got to die. And then what is resurrected by the gospel is the new person. And this is why the first part of this chapter 6, about baptism is so important, right? And Paul is actually, at the beginning of chapter 6, answering a rhetorical question. Maybe let's go through that. St. Paul makes the case that there's always one thing bigger than your sin, and that's God's love. I don't care how big it is. In fact, the greater the sin, the more God's grace. And he says, I know what you're thinking. Well, then I'm doing God a favor by sinning, because then he can show me more grace. And then he says, but don't you know that all of you who were baptized into Christ Jesus have been crucified with him, buried with him, died with him, and will be resurrected with him? The idea is the sinful nature dies, and the new person is resurrected to live a new life. Let me give you my translation of Paul's first verses in chapter 6. The question is, hey, I'm going to do God a favor by keeping on sinning, because then he'll just keep on forgiving me. And Paul says, but that's not who you are anymore. But that's not who you are anymore. Right? Don't you know that guy died? Don't you know he died? And you're resurrected. And then he comes back later and says, but you're still sinner and saint, right? So it's a very subtle but very fundamental understanding of your anthropology to know about really everything, right? So the connection to baptism is beautiful. I have my baptismal certificate on my bedroom wall next to my wife's. And it's kind of like I look at that every day and go, that's my reality. I was a sinful jerk yesterday, and this is by God's grace, this is who I am, righteous in Christ, adopted into the family. I don't know what the world's going to bring today. I may die. But you can take away my health, my wealth, you can take away everything from me, but you cannot take away my adoption through baptism into the family of God. I am a righteous saint. I am right with God. Nothing, because you can't, I like the baptismal certificate because it has a date and a place on it. Yeah, April 16th, 1978, St. Louis County, Missouri. You can't undo that. The devil cannot undo this historical moment, right? And so I am righteous, and today I'll be righteous. And, we'll start over tomorrow because I'm also a sinner, right? And I got this battle, right? Okay, I'm going to stop there. Does anybody want, that's tough stuff. Does anybody want more explanation or make a comment? Add some wisdom to that.
I love that whole baptism thing.
Yeah. I teach college and a little bit of high school, and I tell the college kids, when you go home next break, nicely, tell your mother that your baptismal certificate is yours, and have her take it out of the scrapbook, because it's not just a memory. I want you to frame it and put it on your wall. That's a game changer for a lot of people, right? And you think about people struggling through this addiction we call sin. I think the addiction metaphor can limp like all metaphors, but like the way at least we used to, and for most of us currently think about addiction and alcohol, especially alcoholism, is even if I haven't had a drink in 30 years, I'm still an alcoholic. I'm still a sinner, right? The analogy is still there, right? But today's a new day. I will battle. This is who I am in God's grace. Yeah. All right, let's talk sinner saint a little bit, and contentment and worry. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here because later we're going to talk about this guy named Aristotle and how he thought about ethics, and really in a roundabout way, formation, like how do I become a virtuous, ethical person? So we'll go into detail later about this, but for right now, I just want to say this one thing about Aristotle. And he would say that you practice something and then you become it. So this is very good advice. So if you want to be a softball pitcher, you need to practice being a softball pitcher. And I choose softball for a reason, because if any of you know that, like, you want to be, this is an unnatural movement. Somebody may be born with better athletic ability than somebody else, but you're not born a softball pitcher. In fact, if you want to be, even on a high school level, a good softball pitcher, you have to have a softball pitching coach at like age 4. That's how competitive it is, right? You practice, and you don't get to call yourself a softball pitcher unless you've practiced enough, then you become a softball pitcher. You may be a savant on the piano, but you still need to practice your chords. You practice and then you become something. And this is good advice for regular day life. But Jesus comes around and says something different. He says, dead trees are dead. They produce dead fruit, or no fruit at all. Yeah? Good trees produce good fruit. So notice that Jesus flips it upside down, or flips it on its head. Where Aristotle says, you doing something, you practicing something, then leads to you becoming something. Where Jesus says, no, I make you something, you become that thing, and then you do the thing. I make you righteous, and then you do righteous things. And what Jesus is saying when it comes to spiritual things, you're dead. You dead. You cannot do anything. I need to make you alive. I need to make you alive. Now, as a sinner saint, you're going out there, and now there's this idea of formation, but it's between sinner and saint. It's not like I'm trying to become a saint. Nope, you already are. And that's a real fundamental difference. This also helps with certain things when it comes to like attributes or virtues, stuff like that. Let me talk about the word contentment for a little bit. All right. And again, we'll fully develop Aristotle's idea a little bit later in the day. But are you supposed to be content? I think you could probably think of a few Bible passages about how you're supposed to be content. And you probably went to more than one Thanksgiving service and heard about how you're supposed to be content. Yeah, okay. I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be content. How am I supposed to be content in a world of injustice and sin? How am I supposed to be content? Right? This is sort of like a form of stoicism, right? You just are content with things that go according to the natural order of things, and they think death is a part of the natural order of things, and so why get upset about death? Oh, I should be upset about death. I should not accept it. Should be very upset about death. Can I go on a side note? I'll come back. When someone, and I don't want to make you feel guilty or whatever, but I get a little irritated when funerals become sort of celebrations of life. It's fine. I don't want to be a jerk here. But I think the devil smirks at that a little bit. And because he's getting you to settle for a memory. You know what I mean? Like a preacher needs to get up at a funeral and go, you're going to see her again. We do not accept death. We have a victory over death. We will not accept mere memories or grandma living on in your heart, whatever that means. No, you get to see her again. I'm not content, and neither should you be, right? This is St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, where he's like, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death? He's like talking to death, like you don't get to win, right? So I wonder if then, instead of you worrying about how I'm going to be content, notice what you got. I got to practice contentment and then I'll become content. This is law-based, right? I got to be content. I got to work on my contentment, right? Instead of asking, how do I become content? Ask yourself the question, who's being content or discontent? Now think about it. If I'm a sinner saint, I look at myself, I'm sinner and saint. The sinner is going to be content for wrong reasons. Money, fame, you name it. The sinner is going to be discontent for wrong reasons. I didn't get enough, whatever. Loyalty. I didn't get enough praise. I deserve more. The saint will be content and discontent as well, but for righteous reasons, because a saint always saints. So as a saint, I'm content in the fact that I look at everything as a gift from God. Like, I don't deserve any of it. And therefore, my gratitude, right, I'm formed to think everything is gift, which means I appreciate it, rather than saying, see how I'm formed in my gratitude. But as a saint, I'm also discontent with a sinful world and long for heaven, right? So that's, again, subtle, but I think really interesting. And when I think about the formation of my character and formation of my heart, I see it through the lens of I'm a sinner saint battling, right? And I'm not trying to reach a goal so that I can become something. I already am. This is about battling, right? This is about loving. This is about forming my heart for something better. All right. Maybe one more example, and then we'll take a break. And I want to advertise the great academy in Strasbourg, France. Yes? All right. Okay. I'll explain in a minute. All right. I think some preachers don't understand what damage they do with the law. Yeah? It's kind of an interesting thing where preachers send out the law, like, you're a sinner, do this, do that, or whatever, and they think they can control it. And they go, this law is going to hit that person precisely how I want it to hit them. Not as like a damning law that makes them feel guilty, but encouragement to become a better person. And sometimes they think the gospel goes out and it's unwieldy and they have no control and people are just going to take advantage of stuff, and so they try to keep the gospel here, and the law they're throwing it like the sower in the parable. And I think there's a lot of damage that's done, and one example is the idea of worry. I've heard too many preachers get up and say, worry is a sin. Is it? Sure, right? And, this will be Aristotle a little bit later, but you should be concerned, but not worry. But that's sort of a semantic difference, right? If I say worry is a sin, and you're a mother of teenagers, and you just, you're already coming in barely hanging on, and then you're like, geez, now I just got hammered by the preacher, right? By the preacher. And he's telling me that I shouldn't worry and just have faith. And I think, though, if you see it through that sinner-saint lens, that helps, right? If I worry because I don't think God cares, that's leading towards, that's kind of an unbelief sort of thing. God help me with my unbelief, right? But if I'm worrying for my children out of love, not only is that okay, it's a beautiful thing. In fact, there's something wrong with you if you're not worrying about your children, right? And if we want to talk about this as a difference between concern and worry is the extreme on this side, we'll talk about this later. Okay, fine, but that's not real life, right? I want the preacher to get up and say, here you are, sinner saint, and here's the battle, and it's a good battle. It's okay, it's reality. And know who's doing it, right? Is this you the sinner or are you the saint? I think that's very helpful as we go forward in character development here. Okay, all right, we're going to try to take a 10-minute break here, but Craig Parton is a lawyer from Santa Barbara, and he is the co-director of the Apologetics Institute, an academy of apologetics, evangelism, and human rights in Strasbourg, France. He was the co-director with a guy named John Warwick Montgomery, who is now in heaven, and a guy named Agnes Manouge is going to step into that role. And what they do is they have about a 2-week intensive course on apologetics in this beautiful city, Strasbourg, France, and they'll wine you and dine you a little bit. And I did it. I went twice, and it was fantastic. And we had college kids that would come take this for credit, and we had people in their 60s and probably 70s who just want to hear about how you can defend the faith using reason and eat some good food and see some good art in Strasbourg, France. So he's got some brochures that we'll put out there that you want to take, and if you're like, I'm never going to do that, you may meet somebody who you're like, oh, that's perfect. And this is what happened to me. Craig and his wife Ellen were at my vicar church many, many years ago in Houston, Texas, and she gave me that brochure, and I looked at the price tag as a vicar, still as a student. I go, never happen. And about 5 years ago, or 5 years later, I'm like, I think I have that somewhere. I'm going to find that, and ended up going. So just hang on to it. It may be something that you may do, or a young person in your life may want to do it. So, and he's there to help you. It's a really cool thing. So, all right, 10-minute break, Pastor Bader. All right, get some snacks there, go to the bathroom, coffee, water, all the rest. Thank you.